I used to be a mobster. Then the little brother I picked up shoved the muzzle of a gun in my mouth and said, "Troy, do as you're told and pull your pants down yourself." I thought Grant coveted my power. I didn't realize he coveted my ass. 01. Troy, I heard that on the night of June 7th, you were at the Golden Legend, sleeping with a duck? The muzzle of the gun slid down my chest and rested motionless 3 inches below my navel. Was it good? I half leaned back on the couch and looked at Grant coldly. What did Damon say when we ran into him yesterday? He said, "Troy, that's not a very loyal dog you have around here." I ignored him, thinking that no one would betray me, not even Grant. 16 hours later, Grant's gun was pointed at me. And what a fucking white wolf. The gun against my lower back got heavier and Grant braced himself against the back of the couch, falling into a shadow. "Troy, I asked you a question. Was it good?" "Is that what you're asking me with a gun pointed at me?" Grant didn't say anything. I let out a laugh. "Was it good? Try it?" Grant's eyelashes fluttered. "Is Troy really giving me a try?" "Try your mom." I sneered and stared at him. "Not gonna shoot me?" Grant asked, "Troy, do you know where I was on the night of June 7th? I didn't respond. "I worked for you. The shipment you wanted, I grabbed it back." I narrowed my eyes. "What do you mean? Are you complaining that I'm treating you badly?" If that's the case, he's a real wolf. For 8 years, the person I trusted the most was Grant. Grant shook his head. "When has Troy ever treated me badly? I'm the one who's wronged Troy." That night, I stood in the doorway and thought, if the guy in there can be a duck, why can't it be me? I froze, feeling a little ridiculous. "Are you sick in the head?" "Troy, I'd like to try that." Grant's throat rolled and the muzzle of his gun tapped on my belt. "I'm not at liberty right now. Would you mind taking your pants off yourself?" For the first time in my life, I was so humiliated. "Grant, fuck you." Grant shoved the muzzle of his gun into my mouth and looked at me condescendingly. "Troy, I'm the one who bullied you. Why are you looking for my mom? Come at me." "Dogs." Shoving a touched gun in my mouth? "I'm gonna kill this motherfucker." "I'll kill him." Grant pressed the corners of my eyes. "Troy, that's nice. Your eyes are so red, like you've been bullied and cried." Does Troy cry? The belt buckle was undone. The muzzle was withdrawn from my mouth and replaced with a finger. My mouth was open, drool running down the corners of my mouth. Does Troy ever cry in bed? Grant let out a laugh. "I don't think so. Who else would dare do that to Troy but me? I'm not like all those other guys." He dropped his eyes with a hard edge. "I'll make you hurt and I'll make you cry." Grant gave me a muscle relaxant, and I had no strength in me, but I tried desperately to bite his finger. By the look of him, it shouldn't have hurt too much. As he carried me upstairs, I said, "Grant, you took an oath." Grant swore he'd die if he betrayed me. In 1995, Grant got in trouble with Damon, the big man at the rudder. Grant's mom was Marissa, the head honcho at the Golden Legend. A year earlier, she'd gotten hooked on drugs and was up to her ass in debt. When one of Damon's men went to collect the debt, Grant chopped off his arm with a kitchen knife. Damon let it be known that he would chop off Grant's arms and legs. Golden Legend is my place. Marissa pressed Grant and knelt in front of me, begging me for help. Grant was 18 at the time and as pretty as his mom. Especially those eyes, bright and charming. The same pair of eyes, his mom looked like a fox, he looked like a wolf. Kneeling at my feet, his head was lowered and his back was straight. I was paralyzed on the couch, looking the man up and down, sneering, "None of my business, he's not my son." "Why can't it be?" Marissa wiped her tears away viciously and tugged on Grant. "Son, call me Dad." I laughed and said lightly, "Isn't this nonsense?" Marissa blanched and stopped talking. Grant didn't say, "Dad," he said, "Troy," respectfully. I asked Grant, "What do you want me to do to save you?" He said, "I'll give him back an arm, no more. I want Troy to do justice." I burst out laughing. "Kid, you want to work for me?" Presiding over justice, it's only when you're a member of your own family that you can say that. Grant looked up at me. "Troy, I can do anything." I thought it was kind of funny and made a call for Malcolm to bring in the newly captured traitor. I pulled out my gun and handed it to Grant. Shoot him in the head, shoot him right. Grant took the gun, looked back and forth, pulled the safety off and loaded the gun, aiming at the man kneeling on the ground. The moment he fired, I quickly pushed down his hand and the bullet hit the floor. Grant followed my hand, saw my face, and asked, "Troy, did I pass?" I didn't say anything, knocked out a cigarette and took it in my mouth as Grant held the lighter in both hands and bent over to hand me the light. I kept my eyes down and didn't move. In our line of work, we live a life of bloodshed, and we don't dare take in people of unknown origins. Grant said, "Troy, if I betray you in the future, I'll die a horrible death." The firelight reflected Grant's eyes especially brightly, making this casual vow seem especially firm. 03. Troy will cut me into pieces if he can. Grant throws me onto the bed, removes his glasses, and rips off his buttons. Stripping off his clothes, his lean upper body was covered in scars, old and new. Gunshot wounds, stab wounds, puncture wounds. The most hideous was the knife wound in the back from the left shoulder to the right crotch, which I had cut myself. Damon wasn't a good talker and had insisted on breaking Grant's arms and legs to even the score in the first place. I said to Damon with the knife, "I won't give you the arms and legs. If he lives, the matter will be settled. If he doesn't, I'll give you back your life." Grant did not even blink, stood and let me cut. After a month of coma before waking up. After waking up, he told me, "Troy, good pain ah." The boy who was so sweet and trusting at first, now pressed me to conquer. A wolf that I had raised as a dog for 10 years. He hadn't forgotten that he was a wolf. I had forgotten that he was born not to be a dog. I gouged at the scar. "Grant, I should have cut you down in the first place." "Troy, don't regret it." Grant pursed away the tears irritated out of the corners of my eyes. "Regret makes you look especially incompetent." Regret? Incompetence? I took a deep breath and looked up at the white ceiling. "Dean, what's being crushed? As long as you live, sooner or later you can turn over. There's no shame that can't be endured. It's not too late for a gentleman to take revenge. The first thing you need to do is to get a good deal of money to pay for the work. Endure. Can't stand it. Grant reckless like an animal. How can you do it so hard? I feel like I'm going to bleed. Sometimes it's not good to have too much hardware." I pinched the back of Grant's neck. "Easy, asshole. What's your shitty job?" Grant stiffened for a moment and slumped over me, holding on for dear life, hot and sweaty and sticky. "Troy, I didn't have one." He rubbed the side of my neck. "You teach me." "Teach me? Teach me my ass. If you can't do it, get off. I've never been pinned down before either." 04. When Grant fell asleep, I felt my way to the den, pulled the spare out of the safe, and sat in the den all night holding the phone. At the break of dawn, Grant walked in with his shoes and got down on one knee at my feet to put them on. When he was done, he tilted his head and asked me, "What do you want to eat?" "I'll make it for you." "Duck with sour asparagus and sauce?" Grant hammered it home. "Okay, snow fungus and lotus seed soup and shrimp dumplings." I slammed my phone in his face. "What the hell are you asking?" The glasses were smashed off and the edge cut through the corner of his eye, bringing out a thin trail of blood. Grant caught the sliding cell phone and held it in a death grip, staring at me grimly, not saying a word. I couldn't guess if he was angry. After all, I'd never had to guess his mind before. I lowered my eyes and didn't move to avoid it. I shouldn't lose my temper in this situation. If I angered this white-eyed wolf and he really shot me, it would be no fun. "Troy, who did you just contact? Malcolm or Nolan?" He picks up his glasses and puts them on. "Malcolm is on his own. As for Nolan, Troy is better off not contacting." Malcolm was my henchman and Nolan, my big brother who I had worshipped. I gripped the armrest tightly and glared angrily. "What do you mean? You're so smart, how could you not guess?" Grant threw his cell phone into the fish tank on the table. "Troy is righteous and remembers his brotherhood, but not everyone is like Troy. If you still believe in your good brother, why didn't you just make the call? Troy, you should be glad it was me who betrayed you, because I'm the only one that couldn't let Troy die." I closed my eyes and said with trembling lips, "Grant, get out." "Troy." I lowered my voice. still shaking a little too much to hide. Please get out. Grant stood in front of me for a moment and turned to leave. How the hell did I end up like this? The little brat I raised with my own hands betrayed me, and the big brother I'd lived and died with wanted me dead. I thought about it all night, trying to absolve Nolan. But with the facts in front of me, I couldn't deny them. Grant, no matter how bold he is, he will not dare to turn against the water, unless this family supports him. Unless my big brother Nolan, who has promised life and death, does not want me to live. 05. When Derek comes to visit, Grant isn't there. Derek is Nolan's son, he's ruthless and has no boundaries, he hides drugs from his dad, and Nolan turns a blind eye. 2 years ago, Derek was selling drugs at my place and I cut off 2 of his fingers, and Nolan intervened to smooth things over, but that's how Derek and I ended up with a feud. Troy, all you have to do is give me the stuff. I'll make sure that Grant is taken care of for you, and by then, you'll still be Food Troy in Upper Harbor in style. I narrowed my eyes. What is it? Derek sank his face. Troy, stop pretending and give me the stuff. I stared at him for a long time and suddenly smiled. What if I don't give it? You kill me. Derek's face was very ugly. I looked at him nicely. Good nephew, do you dare to kill me? Derek grabbed me by the collar and flung me to the ground, kicking at me like crazy. Dean, what the fuck are you? You're just a lost dog. Who are you to be bossy with me? When he'd had enough, he yanked me to my feet. I'll ask you again, where's the stuff? He looked like he wanted to kill me but didn't dare. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Derek came a little closer and I felt for the fruit knife I had hidden and struck him straight in the neck. Unfortunately, because I was too slow to move due to being drugged by Grant, he dodged it and only slashed his neck. Derek cursed, covered his neck, pressed down on me, grabbed the knife and raised it high. I'll get you. The blade was cut off by a hand and sticky blood dripped down onto my face. Grant gripped the blade and looked down at Derek. Derek was coming and didn't say hello in advance. He snatched Derek's knife and explained to the black suit behind him, "Take Derek to the hospital." Derek suddenly turned from a mad dog to a sheep, pointing to the wound on his neck and confessing with red eyes, "Grant, he tried to get me killed." Grant looked at the wound on his hand and said nothing. At least make him pay for my cut. Derek went to grab the hem of Grant's shirt. You cut it for me. Grant leaned over and slapped him in the face with the blade. Derek, don't be crazy, do what you're told and go to the hospital. Derek, that lunatic, stared at him for a moment and was actually coaxed away. Quite interesting. Grant knelt beside me and lifted my shirt with clean hands to look at the bruises on my body. I'm sorry, Troy. I said, Derek said I was hiding something. Grant, what was I hiding? Incriminating evidence. You hid incriminating evidence of Nolan. Grant's eyes were dark and his fingertips gently touched the bruise on my stomach. As soon as you die, the incriminating evidence will show up at the police station. I don't have any incriminating evidence in my possession. If I say you have it, you have it. He's not loyal to me and he's not loyal to Nolan. It's good to be disloyal. If you can backslide once, you can backslide twice. I braced myself and sat up, leaned over the coffee table, undid Grant's tie, took his left hand and wrapped it around his wound. Grant, can you get Nolan killed? He smiled down. Troy, I'm not that good. Besides, it's no use wrapping it like that. The wound is too deep, you'll need stitches. He said this, but let my movements go, not stopping them, not refusing them. He also said, Troy, you really don't know how to please people. You're obviously asking me to do something, but your heart isn't sincere. What do you mean by sincere? I tightened my tie and moved closer to him, pressing my hand against his belt buckle. So do you call it sincere when I get it for you? Grant took a deep breath and looked at me squarely. I don't care who you are, get off Troy now. 06. Grant got me into the hospital, checked me over from top to bottom, and got me back overnight. He really seemed to be afraid that I would die. The scenery outside the car window flashed rapidly, and I finally managed to ask, Grant, why did you betray me? So that the next time Troy goes whoring, I'll be in a position to kick down that door. It was ridiculous. Don't tell me you went through all this trouble for my ass. That's true. Grant looked over and smiled. Troy's ass is worth $1,000. A month ago, I would have shot this asshole. But now, all I can think about is how I can put my ass to good use. After all, it seemed surprisingly attractive to Grant. The ass can be sacrificed, but one thing has to be said up front. Grant, find some movies to watch sometime. Grant. Troy, don't talk smack when you're seriously injured, you're easy today. Despite what he said, I still saw Grant hiding in the study to watch a movie. The room was dim, the light from the screen flickered on his features, and he looked so indifferent that if I hadn't heard a gasp, I would have thought he was watching a financial channel. But it turns out that Grant really is learning properly. I was so good I was skeptical, my brain went numb. The bruise on my stomach hadn't gone away yet, and Grant rubbed hot medicinal oil into my bruise. I leaned over the bed to scrutinize him, and his expression seemed unusually gentle. Men are the best talkers when they're done. I pressed the butt of my cigarette against the back of Grant's hand, and the muscles in his little arm tensed momentarily, but he didn't move a muscle. Looked meek, but what could be true about a traitor? Cigarette out, I say, is Nolan good to you? Better than Troy was to you? Grant didn't say anything. I don't want to hit the meds tomorrow. I crushed the cigarette. Don't worry, I won't run. I'm nothing more than a downward dog right now, and there are tons of people out there who want me dead. I'm not that stupid. Grant shook his head. I'm not worried, I've been with you for so long. I know best what kind of person you are. Troy, don't coax me. I clasped his chin and looked straight into his eyes. Grant, last time Derek played hardball with me, I couldn't even defend myself. When have I ever been kicked to the ground and stomped on? Thanks to you, Troy has become a dog that anyone can kick. Doesn't it give you a special pleasure to watch me get bullied and trampled on? Troy, Grant's voice lagged and his gaze sank slightly. Last time was an accident, it won't happen again. I laughed coldly and gently slapped his face. Do you really think you're someone? If there is an accident once, there will be a second time. Don't get yourself into trouble with a tiger. I hung my hand feebly. Grant, if you are still a human being, leave me some self-respect. The next day, Grant didn't medicate me, and I was still eating when he left the house. The man walked to the door, put on his jacket, and suddenly folded back, pulling me up from my chair, tugging me into his arms, and hugging me tightly. Troy, give me a little more time, give me another chance, okay? I patted him on the back and said, you should go, Grant. It was time for me to go too. Enough of playing house. Next time we see each other, we're going to do it the grown-up way. 07. I knew every surveillance in this villa by heart. The hard part to solve was doubling the bodyguards outside the villa. Grant was very wary and couldn't quite take my word for it. In the afternoon, I suddenly disappeared from the surveillance, and Grant quickly rushed back, circled the villa, and left with the men. The men were gone before I got out of the exhaust ducts. The first thing I did after I ran out was to find Damon. I met with Damon the night before Grant backfired. He tried to pull me in, saying, Nolan's old, and when people get old, they get confused. Damon wanted to start his own business a long time ago, and he was the one who wanted to kill Nolan the most. In the past, Nolan was the only one I looked up to, and Damon and I were at loggerheads. But things are different now. I want to kill Nolan, and Damon's the best partner. Damon said, Troy, I don't believe you. I said, I could kill Derek. Damon laughed. Interesting. Troy doesn't know? Last night, Derek's drug stash house was targeted by the cops, and he ran off in the night, and the cops are arresting people all over the world. That careless? Damon shrugged. Who knows? There's a traitor in the gang. He narrowed his eyes and looked over. Who does Troy think it is? Grant's face popped into my head. I do have one thing I need to ask Troy for though. Damon handed over a cell phone, the screen showing a picture of a woman holding a 4-year-old child. Please, Troy, invite them over for me. I shook the phone. Who are they? Grant's soft underbelly, his wife and son. Damon stood up and patted me on the shoulder. Troy, that dog you had, paired up 4 years ago. Grant hid it well, I only found out recently, I don't think Troy knows. The man is in Nolan's hands now, and I'm guessing Grant will turn against us. Odds are Nolan has his lifeblood. Damon walks away and I hold my phone for a long time. Troy, I haven't had it, you taught me. Can't let Troy die. Why can't I? Give me more time, give me another chance. Luckily I didn't believe that white wolf. Luckily I didn't believe a word of it. What kind of feelings did Grant, with his wife and kids, have when he slept with me? Was he thinking, as I trembled under his watchful eye, that the unstoppable Troy was nothing more than that? Pulled down to look like nothing more than a tail-wagging slut. I'm gonna kill you. 08. With Derek in trouble and Nolan burnt out and on his own, it was a great opportunity to grab someone. Things were going well, and I settled the man into the abandoned underground boxing ring on the south side of town. Undoing the woman's blindfold, the woman reacted strangely when she saw me. She sighed in relief, looked at me with tearful eyes, and called out, "Troy." I narrowed my eyes and thought she looked a little familiar. "You know me?" The woman opened her mouth, gave me a sultry and deep look, lowered her head and wrapped her arms around her son, and didn't say anything back. I glanced at her son, exquisitely beautiful, sitting obediently, with a pair of dark, sunken eyes staring straight at me. "What are you looking at?" I deliberately scrunched up my face and fiercely scolded him. Her son slowly averted his eyes and muttered in a small voice, "Childish ghost. Uncle will kill you." For hours later, Grant broke into the gym alone. I was sitting on the couch loading my gun, little Duden was sitting at my feet watching, the woman was gagged and tied to a chair, a red laser dot on her brow. Grant took one step closer and I nudged the little kid in the head with the loaded gun, eyes closed. The kid dutifully closed his eyes. I raised my hand and shot Grant in the foot. "Stand there and don't move." Grant stopped and held up his hands. "Troy, let them go and let me do whatever I want." I let out a laugh. "Isn't that what you promised Nolan in the first place?" "Anything." "Grant, you're still a wolf." Grant looked at me. "You're not like Nolan, you won't kill them. Don't always act like you know me so well." I turned my hand and pointed my gun at the little beaner's head and cocked my head. "Don't you dare try it." Grant stares at my gun and tenses up in the flesh. I said, "Kneel." Without any hesitation, Grant dropped straight to his knees smashing with a dull thud. Sure enough, this mother and child, to him, were important. I took a deep breath and suppressed the inexplicable fire. "When did you and Nolan hook up?" "A year ago." Grant didn't avoid my gaze. "Troy, do you remember, 3 years ago, you and Nolan had a dispute over drugs, and then Derek's finger was broken, and Nolan finally compromised on not touching drugs, and the person he compromised with wasn't his brother Dean, but Troy, who was a rising star in Hong Kong. I reminded you more than once that Nolan couldn't be trusted, and that you had to make a plan early. But at that time, you didn't allow anyone to tarnish the relationship. But at that time you didn't allow anyone to tarnish your big brother. When I talked too much, you got annoyed with me and threw me away. All I could do was shut up if I wanted to follow you. Troy, you'll never be able to see the man lifting the knife until it falls on you." Grant seemed to sneer. "There must be a price to pay before you dare come to your senses." There was a time when Grant urged me to start my own business. I beat him up and told him to get lost, to come back when he was clear, and never to come back if he wasn't. Grant was sent by me to East Harbor for 6 whole months, then returned to Upper Harbor and said he was wrong. He knelt down beside me with his forehead on my knee and said, "Troy, don't kick me out, please." After that, Grant never said another word about Nolan until he turned against me. At the end of the day, I was wrong. The good thing is, there's still room. Good thing I'm still alive. If I'm alive, I can turn around. Grant, you have 1 month to trade Nolan's life for the lives of your wife and son. I rubbed my temples and raised my eyes. "I'll only wait 30 days. Grant said, "That's enough. 30 days is enough." As he walked away, he turned back, glancing at little Bean, his eyes complicated. "Troy, be gentle with him." Damn, what kind of status, and give Troy an assignment? Looking back, little Do Ding didn't know when he opened his eyes, and was stretching his fingers into the barrel of the gun, fluttering his big eyes. "Can I have this to play with?" I unloaded and tossed the gun to him. 3 days later, Little Bean took the gun apart and reassembled it in front of me, then handed it back to me, yawned and asked, "Can you hold me in bed?" "Can't." Then can you give me back to Grant? No. Then can you hold me if I want to sleep? 09. On the 7th day of Grant's absence, Derek resists arrest at customs and is shot on the spot. Nolan fell ill. 20 days later, news breaks of Nolan's passing. Before Damon could make a move, the cops ordered a couple of scenes. The death of the gangster in Upper Harbor didn't stir up much excitement. Instead, the city's anti-triad efforts were fruitful. Grant swings into entrepreneurship. When the plan was first cleansed, Grant was responsible for investing in the business and starting the company, which went on successfully. By the time Damon got out of trouble, the uncles of the Hong Shing Club had embraced Grant as the head of the house. Damon led a search of the ring, put a gun to my head and asked, "Troy, where's the guy I want?" When news broke of Nolan's passing, I secretly sent away Grant's wife and son. My dog I can use, no one else can. Troy's righteous. He's screwed over by Grant, and he's still defending him. I made a cup of tea. Damon, Grant's life is mine. I can kill him, you can't. Damon loaded his gun. Then Troy can go wait in the Yellow Springs. 2 days ago, I went to a philosophy class at NTU. Professor Pei is very good. If Damon had a soft spot, it would be his good-looking brother-in-law. He's a murderer and a fireman, but he doesn't even dare to say a dirty word in front of his gentle brother-in-law. Damn, dead gay. Damon's pupils suddenly tightened, both cheeks tensed, pretending to be relaxed sneer. Troy, you know how I do, an insignificant person, can also threaten me? There are 140 ships anchored in Multiply Shun Harbor. All of them will leave the harbor by 14 o'clock tomorrow. The first ship has already left 1 hour ago. Guess which ship Professor Pei is on? Damon's eyes were bloodshot and his face was grim as he squeezed 2 words through his teeth. Dean. I pivoted away from his gun. Don't point it if you're afraid to shoot. Getting up, I straightened my collar. If we don't go, we won't make the last boat. Damon cursed and hurried off with his men, running impatiently straight to the door. I followed slowly out and saw a big G waiting in front of the ring. Grant stepped out of the car and walked toward me saying, "Troy, it's time to go home." I pulled my gun against his heart. Grant was unfazed and emboldened. Kill me and Troy won't live. I turned the gun around. You kill yourself. That's not an option. Grant gripped my hand with the gun, his gaze unbridled. I haven't lived long enough. I've only just earned the right to enjoy my spoils. Think about it, if you don't die, it's your wife and children who will die. Grant let out a laugh. I told you Troy won't kill them. And to threaten me. Grant pulled out the clip and knocked the bullets out, saying half-heartedly, Troy's gun, he'd have to point it at himself. I scolded Grant the whole way. After arriving home, I saw the little beanstalker stacking cards in the living room and realized why Grant was so confident. Grant is a man who is cautious to the point of perversion. How can he give people leverage before playing handsome? Grant carried me up the stairs, passed through the living room and shouted, Logan, go to your room. Logan put down his deck, gave him a look, and obediently headed for his room. When he got to the door, he suddenly turned around, pointed at me and asked, When you're done with him, can you let me play with him for a while? What a niche text. Am I a toy for your Han family? Grant hooked his lips and refused mercilessly, no. Logan watched us disappear around the corner of the stairs. Grant and I had a fight on the bed that ended in my defeat. Grant tied my wrists with a belt, squeezed my legs, buckled the back of my neck to hold me down on the bed and slapped my ass. Troy, settle down, I don't want to drug you. I was so ashamed and angry that I cursed, Are you an animal? Your son is still under the building. Grant raised his eyebrows. Wouldn't that be more exciting? I tried to arouse his conscience. Grant, are you doing this to your wife? Grant was silent for a long time and smiled lowly. It's okay, she won't mind. I was so angry that I couldn't speak. I won't be a mistress. Grant was even happier. Okay, I'll divorce her tomorrow, marry Troy, and make you my wife. I'll divorce her tomorrow and marry Troy so you can be my wife. I still wanted to open my mouth. Grant clasped my neck, forced me to raise my head, and kissed me from behind. The waves were so strong that I fell onto my back, picking at the pillows and biting the sheets for dear life. Couldn't scream, Couldn't let him know I was comfortable. On what grounds? Why have a family and do this to me? I should kill Grant. Dean, killing him wouldn't be condescending. Grant pinched my teeth open, hooked the sheet out and sighed, "Don't bite." The tone was gentle, but used hard force. "Troy, scream it out." A muffled grunt spills out of me, my eyes instantly red with irritation. Shaking my voice, I let out a harsh statement, "Grant? I'm going to kill you." Grant covers my mouth, muffling my whimpers in his palm. "Don't talk in anger. Real men never get high off their mouths." I looked for a chance to kill Grant almost every day, losing many battles and getting more and more frustrated. Once, I even got his gun and pulled the trigger. In that moment, neither of us moved, and Grant stared at me in a daze for a good 3 seconds before coming back to his senses. When he raised his eyes, they were crimson. If I hadn't run out of bullets yesterday, I'd be dead right now. He pinched my wrist and dragged me closer, his face grim as if he was crying, "Troy, you really gave it up." I whispered, "A traitor, what wouldn't I give up?" "Traitor." Grant snapped my neck, looking a little crazy. "If it wasn't for me, could you be alive and standing here messing with me? If I hadn't turned against you, who would have risked their lives to kill Nolan and his son for you? Dean, what do you think you're doing pointing a gun at me over and over again? The reason you're so emboldened is because you know how much I love you. You know that I love you no matter what you do to me. You take advantage of my love with impunity, but you're afraid to admit it. But Troy, there's more than one way to love, and I do get angry." Grant locked me up, sometimes hanging from the beams, sometimes tied to the bed. He fed me pills. I was like a vegetable. I couldn't do anything. Grant did everything himself. For 10 days, I almost lost my dignity as a human being. I confessed my mistakes to Grant and begged him for forgiveness. Finally, I begged Grant to kill me like a madman. Maybe he was frightened by me. Grant dressed me, opened the door to my room, kissed my forehead and said, "Troy, don't be afraid, it won't happen again." I didn't believe him. Grant knew me well enough to know how to frustrate me and what to do to make me give in. If I stayed any longer, I would sooner or later be tamed into a dog that would only wag its tail at him. I had to go far away from Grant. Only before I could act, my plan was exposed. Grant didn't get mad, just calmly told me, "Troy, you can't run out of here without my permission. And, exhaust ducts, stop drilling." My pupils clenched. How did you know? This time, I wasn't going to hide in the exhaust ducts. Didn't Troy suspect anything the last time he made a good run? Grant took off his glasses, his gaze clearing. "Back then, you hurt Derek, and Nolan asked me for someone, so I couldn't explicitly refuse him, so I had to look for an opportunity to let you go. At that time, if you entered the Cheen residence, it was difficult for me to keep you safe. Grant was warning me, he knew everything, I couldn't run away. To be honest, kind of looking down on me. 2 months later, I managed to escape to the customs. Not waiting to get on the ship, I ran into my enemies, and when the bullet went into my stomach, I suddenly didn't understand what I was tossing around. There were plenty of people in Shandong who wanted me dead. If I run out of Shanghai Harbor, I can never come back. Shandong is my route, I can't leave. Grant was the one who saw through it. I couldn't get away. When Grant found me, I had only one breath left. He held my hand tightly, and hot tears dripped down my face. Said, "Troy, don't leave me." Say, "Troy live." My eyelids were getting heavy. But still thinking, so Grant can still cry, has he ever cried before? Grant said, "If you die, I'll kill Logan, and if you're willing to leave me behind, you're not willing to leave Logan behind." What? It's not my son. What do I have to give up? Grant, "Troy, Logan is your son. Logan is your son." 11. Grant came back to life for me. 3 months later, I barricaded Grant in the hospital room. "Tell me, what's going on?" Grant looked at me for a long time and reluctantly spoke, more or less through gritted teeth. "It's not just a love debt from Troy's youth. I was a bit of a wild card when I was younger. A one-night stand didn't go down well and left a seed. For years ago, a woman came looking for me with a baby in her arms, and Grant stopped her. After confirming that the child was mine, Grant lied to the woman, saying I had disowned them. The woman made a scene, And in order to appease her and avoid making a big deal out of it, Grant decided to put up his own money and raise the mother and child. The premise was that they couldn't see me. Grant was discreet and unobtrusively raised the children for me for 3 years without anyone finding out. Until Nolan found out about a year ago, and then Nolan used Logan's mother and son to threaten Grant into turning against him. The whole thing was ridiculous and outrageous. I was so angry I fished up a pillow and hit him, pulling my wound and blushing in pain. "What the fuck were you thinking?" Grant caught the pillow, staring at my wound, his voice low. "I'm afraid that you marry her, afraid that you have a family, afraid that you have a soft underbelly, afraid that you die, afraid that you don't want me." "I am so insignificant," Troy said to throw away. Grant raised his eyes and smiled at me. "I don't even know what to do so you can see me. Even if it's for Logan, don't toss it. With the way things are going in Upper Harbor right now, it's going to be hard for you guys to survive without me." Grant opened his mouth, his throat rolled, not daring to say anything else, his words repeated obscurely, "Even if it's for Logan, stay." I closed my eyes and had nothing to say. "What are you doing back here? I thought you didn't want Grant anymore." In the master bedroom, Logan was sprawled out on the side of my bed with his hands on his little head. "Can you take me with you next time you run away?" I cupped Logan's face and looked him up and down. "Aren't you being a little too smart for your own good?" Logan blinked and wrapped his arms around my neck and pouted. "Please, I want to be with you. Grant is bad." I narrowed my eyes. "Grant abused you? You dissed him like that?" Logan sniffled and grunted in aggravation. "I hate him. Let's run." Looking up, I saw Grant leaning against the door with a cup of coffee in his hand, watching Logan's back with a smirk. I raised my eyebrows and just wanted to laugh. Logan suddenly stopped grunting, jumped down from the bed and fussily straightened his clothes. "Uncle, you have a good rest. Dad said it's very dangerous outside. You mustn't run around." Turning to see Grant, he gave an exaggerated and called, "Dad," in a good manner. Grant carries the coffee and picks up the little cub with one hand and walks outside. Logan, "Dad, where are we going?" Grant, "To explore how Dad abused you." Logan looks over at me. "Handsome, mind your man." I laughed so hard my stomach hurt. "Grant, go easy on him." Logan? 3 days later, Logan was sent away. I looked for Grant to fight and was held down on the table with his arms in a chokehold. Damon is back. Troy, Upper Harbor is going to be a mess. It's not safe for Logan to follow us. I sneered. "Why don't you send me away too?" Grant was silent for a moment, letting go of me and crouching down to put my shoes on, just like he'd done countless times. "Because you're the Troy of Upper Harbor, you won't leave Upper Harbor, just like I won't leave you. You're going to die with Upper Harbor, just like I'm going to die with you." He rested his forehead on my knee and muffled, "Troy, don't go." 5 fingers digging into the roots of Grant's hair, I say, "Don't go. Don't go, Grant, in this life, for now." Grant's perspective. 01. Dean is slightly face-blind. He can't remember his lover's face, much less mine. He thought 1995 was the first time he saw me, but for me, it was a reunion. The first time I saw Dean was in the alley next to Golden Legend. In 1989, Shung Kong was a mess, and Dean was not yet the famous Troy. Dean was not yet sitting on the leather sofa of Golden Legend, waving his hand, and a bunch of minions would rush to do his work. 18-year-old Dean needed to carry his own knife and firefight people in the streets. 12-year-old me was always getting beat up in alleyways because of my mom. "Where'd you get that, schoolboy? What's wrong with you?" In 1989, Dean picked me up from the dark alley and pointed a cigarette holder at my face. "Why did you get beaten up like this?" I was bruised and swollen. Dean laughed at me, but in fact, he himself was not much better. The gash on his head was still clattering with blood, and he looked much more miserable than I was. When he was done, he pushed down his cigarette and said, "Kid, call me brother and I'll stand up for you, okay?" In 1989, the pain of his childhood dissipated with the sound of brother. Dean taught me to fight evil with evil. After he had cleaned up those bad kids, he picked up my school uniform, shook it, and threw it on my head. "Kid, go to school properly in the future. Don't be a bad guy." I asked, "What's a bad guy?" Dean pointed to himself. I am the bad guy. In Dean's long and wonderful life, I was an episode not worth remembering. In my 12 years of boring, pale life, Dean was the most colorful. It wasn't fair. And such unfairness continued throughout my life. The very first chase was secretive. I looked for Dean on the streets, and every time I saw him, it was like winning the lottery. Dean got into another fight, Dean got hurt, Dean so many friends, Dean has a great smile, Dean is so strong, Dean is scary when he's mean. In the most secretive corners, I looked at Dean 1,000 times. And he did not look back. He seemed as if he would never look back. At 18, when I raised the knife to fight back, I was thinking about Dean. The blood fell on my face like it had fallen on Dean's. I'll always remember that twilight when Dean turned around and walked away without even asking me what my name was. Because he was the bad guy and I was the good guy. And now I was the bad guy too. When we meet again, he's Troy, the infamous Troy from Hong Kong, who no longer takes the initiative to say, "Kid, call me brother and I'll stand up for you." He didn't remember me. But when I called him Troy, he still stood up for me. When I followed Dean, I had a feeling as if this was my destiny. I was born to follow him. I should have gone with him when I was 12. But it wasn't until I was 18 that I managed to keep up with him. 03. At 20, the subject of my wet dreams was Dean. I dreamed of his hand with a gun, cutting across the knot of my throat, capturing my soul. I wasn't exactly faithful to Dean. I would peer at his body through his collar, and just holding his ankles would turn me on. Every touch, even his chastisement, was like a reward to me. I wasn't satisfied with Dean's occasional glances. I wanted his long-lasting gaze. I knew it wasn't normal, and it was clear that Dean liked women. He had many lovers. He let women kiss his body and leave cloying lipstick on his shirt. But he's also thin-skinned and doesn't even remember his lovers' faces or names. Dean doesn't believe in love, only power and brotherhood. I soothed my jealousy. It's okay. Those people don't matter. Dean didn't love them. Dean just needed women and sex. I could lie to myself and put up with Dean hanging out with women, but I couldn't accept him sleeping with a man. The firefight on the high seas, I didn't even care about the gunshot wound in my shoulder. I just wanted to tell Dean the good news quickly. I wanted to see him smile and pat me on the shoulder for a job well done. But Malcolm was guarding the door to his room, saying, "We'll talk about what's going on tomorrow, Troy's busy." I heard ambiguous voices inside the door and asked in a daze, "Who's in there?" "Old you sent over a duck that looks better than a woman." I stood in the doorway like a log, feeling myself slowly crumbling from the inside, imagining my Troy, with the hands of my dreams, touching another man. Duck? Aqua. My eyes are crimson as I stare at Malcolm. Is he as good-looking as me? Malcolm was dumbfounded, his brows furrowed. "What's gotten into you? Hurry up and go dig the bullet out of your shoulder. Troy won't be out for a while." I shook my head and said, "I'll wait for him." Since both men and women are allowed, then why can't it be me? And since men aren't rejected either, why am I the only one who's ignored? My Troy, you stand so high, you can only see the top. If I reach the top, will I be able to win your favor? 04. I accepted the olive branch handed to me by Nolan, pretended to be coerced by him, and betrayed Troy. Dean refused to guard against Nolan, couldn't bear to lay hands on Nolan, so this was something I had to do. The only reason I risked my life was to protect Dean's peace by taking the lives of Nolan and his son. He believed in Nolan too much, and sooner or later he was going to fold on it. I walked alone and didn't try to explain myself to Dean. Because he wouldn't believe me, not before I turned against the water, and he wouldn't believe me after. And I don't need him to, I just need him to live and watch over me. 05. I didn't expect Derek to go behind my back to find Dean, and when I saw him raise the knife on Troy, my heart stopped. When Derek talked to me, I thought of 20 ways to kill him. Looking at the bruises on Troy's stomach from the kick, I reflected for the first time on whether I'd been too extreme. I should have taken my time. Not necessarily in this way. My Troy should have kept his head up, defied everyone, and gotten back up when he was down. This frail, downtrodden look really doesn't suit him. 06. Derek was slashed by Dean, and when Nolan found out, he asked me to invite Dean to stay at the Chin residence. That night Dean poked me in the heart, forcing me to promise not to give him any drugs. I knew he wanted to run, and I knew he would. I know my Troy, don't I? 07. I didn't think Dean would work with Damon to get the woman and Logan. I didn't care if the woman and Logan lived or died. It was better if Dean killed them. But I had to care. I was afraid that if Dean killed Logan himself, he'd come after me if he knew the truth. So, I had to keep pretending. I'm close to closing the net, and if Dean doesn't pull this off, I'll have Nolan dead within a month, and Damon in the process. 08. All things being equal, I thought it would get better slowly. It didn't matter if Troy didn't accept me. I had my whole life to explain and reveal myself to him. I wasn't asking him to love me, just to go soft for once. But he shot me. He didn't know it wasn't loaded. He wanted me dead. He called me a traitor. No matter what I explained, I would always be a traitor in his eyes. At that moment, I hated him. When I fed Dean the pills, when I undressed him, when I hung him up, when I washed him. For 13 days, every moment, I knew Dean would never forgive me. But he was good. Dean had never been so good. He lay in my arms, at my mercy, at my beck and call. He begged, he confessed, and then he let me kill him. That day, I looked at Dean, curled up in bed, covered in bruises, and suddenly felt a sharp pain. It came from my heart, and it was intense. Why is this happening? What had I done to my Troy? I was supposed to be the one to hold and protect him, but how did I end up torturing him like this? Was I wrong, Troy? From the beginning, it should have never been forced. From the beginning, I should have followed you. I shuddered, stroked his forehead, felt his tension, and said, Troy, don't be afraid, it won't happen again. I'm sorry. 09. Dean wanted to run. He wanted to run. There was always a way to get away. He ran one lap and lost half his life. There were 3 critical notices, and I even picked out our grave sites. The day Dean woke up, I covered my face and held back my tears. Shit. I really haven't lived long enough. Who knows how long it will take to catch up with him in the next life.